I think, first of all, this shows that the economic sanctions do work, because it shows that Russia really is in trouble, and especially on their ruble currency, they're really in difficulties. Our position is that you cannot just change the terms of contract. So we'll just stick to the position we had and the contracts we have. In any case, on the Belgian side, we're not very much exposed to that. Less than 5% of our consumption is coming from Russia. But let's see if Russia really pushes through. But the European position is a correct one. We won't be blackmailed.
If he does switch off the gas, even for your 5%, you could find a fracturing of the unity that we've seen as those countries like Germany and others who do require greater amounts start to get a bit iffy.
Well, we've been working hard over the last weeks to make sure we're prepared for events like this one. A lot of reserves have been constituted. A lot of solidarity has been built on how do we cope with an interruption like that one. So we are prepared. I honestly think if Mr. Putin does that, yes, we will be impacted. But the impact will be multitudes greater on his side.
The question of President Zelensky's speeches, beautifully tailored as yesterday's was. So he has excellent advisors and speechwriters. He keeps saying what he wants, which is the no-fly zone and the greater supply of arms. And of course, there's a huge amount of arms being supplied. But the reality is he's not getting it. He's not getting his aircraft that he asks for. He's not getting his no-fly zones. They are the consistent things that he has requested and he's not received.
Well, but he's received a lot. And he's received a lot of support. And you really see two models competing one with the other. The Russian model, which is the classic authoritarian hierarchical model, and the way President Zelensky and the Ukrainians work it is by trying to rally the rest of the world around them and getting support. The amount of weapon support that he has been getting has been much more than anyone could have expected, and we over the last weeks have also decided to buy weapons and to send new weapons directly to Ukraine. Now, about the no-fly zone, I've been very clear on this in Parliament, because I think at some point you just have to put the things on the table. If we as NATO would install a no-fly zone, this would drag all the European NATO allies into a full-out war on the European continent. That's to the advantage of no one. It certainly isn't to the advantage of the Ukrainian people. One of the good things is that Europe is stabilized and is not a party, but is supporting Ukraine.
When you made that decision some weeks ago, you couldn't have known then that Ukraine was going to be so resilient and the fortitude would be so great. So you couldn't have known then that they were going to be on the upper hand at the moment. In which case, as I listened to Zelensky, I kept thinking, he's going to eventually turn around and say to you all, well, when I lose, and you're all hand-wringing about, oh, poor Zelensky, poor Ukraine, he's going to say, I told you what I needed and you didn't give it me.
Well, but let's look at how we are coping with this. First of all, we're supporting him with weapons. Secondly, the economic sanctions are really targeting the Russian economy right in the heart. And you see the impact of these economic sanctions are making it extremely hard for Russia to wage that war. That's the way how we deal with it. Being part of the conflict and having a full-out conflict on the European continent, that would actually hamper our capacity to help Ukraine. It would not be to the advantage of Ukrainian people to expand this war over the whole continent.
Do you accept that, whether we use the technical term, you are at war, but de facto, Europe and the United States is in a war with Russia?
There is a war going on in Ukraine, and we are involved with economic sanctions. And these economic sanctions, you could say, is an economic war. That is correct. But we are not a party in the military side of the war, and we want to maintain it that way.
And when it's over, as it will be, and if we assume for the moment that it's a really messy ending, with something to do with the eastern part of Ukraine, and who knows what the final...
No one knows.
No one knows. But ultimately, would you be in favour of reparations from the Russians for the enormous damage done to Ukraine?
First of all, let's see how we can end that war as fast as possible. And it's good that there are peace talks. Not sure what they will lead to, but a war is never ended on the battleground. The war is ended around the table. After that, the rebuild-up of Ukraine will be a major task. And as a European Union, we've said we want to be part of this. If you look at the atrocities that have taken place, we are making sure that everything is being recorded, that war crimes will be monitored, evaluated, and prosecuted. And after that, I think it's quite clear that the position will be that Russia needs to play its role in repairing all the damages that have happened. But let's first of all try to get a ceasefire. And if you want to have real peace talks, you need to have a ceasefire. That's the first priority.
Oh, and once that's done, Margaret Thatcher famously said about Mikhail Gorbachev, he's a man I can do business with. Post-Ukraine, is Vladimir Putin in a post-Ukraine environment somebody you can do business with?
That would really surprise me. I'd be very surprised if that would be possible. If you see everything that has happened and the sanctions that we have today, those sanctions are here to stay for a long time. I mean, this is not just a page that you can turn.
So even post ceasefire and whatever comes, essentially, as long as Vladimir Putin is there, Europe's going to find it just about impossible to do business with him.
Well, except if the man completely changes his mind.
You don't believe that?
But honestly, I don't see that on the horizon. I see a president that was ill-advised, that took poor decisions based on wrong information, a war that was poorly organized and that is even more poorly executed. This is what I see. And a president that is not changing his mind, and despite of the fact that this is obviously not going the way he wanted. And the sheer devastation of that country, I mean, it's completely pointless, illegal. The humanitarian atrocities taking place is something that no one would have believed that would still happen. We haven't seen that over the last 50, 60 years. I mean, repairing that is not an easy thing, and I would be very, very, very surprised if Mr. Putin is the person who would repair everything that he's caused.